Tiz, a vulnerable young Brazilian girl, finds herself speeding through the night towards the lights of a big city. Her companion is a man who has promised her parents that he will find their daughter work as a maid. What awaits her there is something different, however, and her life becomes increasingly fraught with danger, both mental and physical.
Interwoven into this tragic and violent storyline is the account of a young doctor whose life and love affair in the south of England are in stark contrast to the dangerous, sexually abusive situation in which Tiz finds herself. Yet their stories and that of their families become closely linked. You are listening to Tiz from the novel The Garden of Sparkling Delight by Deborah Vaughan. Part 15. Home Delight. Aidan, a young medical student from Britain, his wife Kirsty and small baby daughter Joy, arrive in Brazil to continue his training. On arrival, they are met by a driver and taken, as if in a Grand Prix, to their Brazilian accommodation in a convent attached to a teaching hospital. Kirsty is introduced to the local market by Sister Maria and is overwhelmed by the new sights and sounds that surround her.
"I hope this journey is a short one, sweetheart," she whispered to the top of the downy head, "or you're going to get so hot." Her next thought was, "I wish I had my sunglasses," as the light was so bright it blinded her eyes after the comparative dimness of the airport buildings. However, these were in one of the cases, so she was forced to squint to stop her eyes from watering.
"Stay here," ordered the driver. "I get car." They stood and waited obediently with their bulwark of cases around them, a lonely little island in a sea of swirling people.
"I hope he's not going to be too long," muttered Kirsty, trying to shade the baby with her hand. "It's too hot for you. And me too," she added feelingly. The man soon returned, however, and they climbed gratefully into the back of his dilapidated old Volkswagen. The traffic was dense around the airport, and they made slow progress at first. But when they reached the main highway, the driver sped up until they were ratting along at a breakneck pace. In desperation, Kirsty hung on to the baby with one arm and Aidan with the other.
"I think he's practising for the next Grand Prix," said Aidan, smiling at her. "Don't worry, darling. They all drive like this here. You'll get used to it." Once they reached the outskirts of Beleza, the car had to slow down again, and they progressed at a honking crawl along busy residential streets to the city centre, which was thronged with people crowding the pavements and even the roads. Hot, stifling exhaust fumes swirled round them through the open windows of the car, and the noise of the enveloping traffic began to make Kirsty's head ache. Loud music played everywhere, and strong smells wafted in, including the mouth-watering odour of roasting meat and garlic. This made her realise that she hadn't eaten a proper meal for hours, and she began to feel very hungry.
"In fact," she thought to herself, "I don't even know what time my body thinks it is." She tried to close her eyes, but found them irresistibly opening of their own accord. "Oh, I do wish they would stay shut," she thought crossly. "I should be so much happier if I couldn't see this mad traffic and these huge lorries bearing down on us. I'm sure we'll be crushed before we get there."
But at last the car turned into the gates of the convent and slowly chugged its way along the drive amidst a throng of pedestrians and traffic. Kirsty could see a modern hospital block through the trees, but the convent itself, when they eventually arrived, seemed to be an old colonial-style building built of white-washed brick and single-storied. "I carry," ordered the driver cheerfully, getting out and manhandling all the cases up the steps, through an imposing carved wooden door and into a long empty hallway. He then abandoned them, muttering something incomprehensible in Portuguese. The big door closed behind them with a bang, leaving them completely alone. There they stood, like a bedraggled group of refugees, feeling tired and miserable. Nobody seemed to be about, and it was blessedly quiet and cool. The hall was dark, but looking down its length in the dim light, Kirsty could see bars of sunlight shining across the floor at intervals where doors had been left open on either side. Silence descended, and several minutes slowly ticked past.
"What do we do now?" whispered Kirsty in a small voice. "We can't stand here all day." As she spoke, they heard a door click open at the far end of the hall, and a small, ghostly apparition began to make its way purposefully towards them out of the gloom, passing in and out of the sunlight and shadows. "It's a nun, but she's in white," thought Kirsty, surprised, as a patch of sunshine briefly illuminated the figure. As she got closer, Kirsty also saw that the sister was both elderly and slightly built. "She looks just like a little robin," she thought, amused, for the ankles and calves above the heavy leather sandals were small and skinny, but the eyes were bright, beady, and dark brown. Reaching them, the nun held out her hand and smiled. This seemed to light up her whole face and gave it a warmth and luminosity that was immediately attractive. Her gestures, too, were bird-like and quick, and when she spoke to them in perfect English, her voice had a gentle, high, fluting quality that was like nothing Kirsty had ever heard before. "I'm Sister Maria," she said. "Welcome. You must be exhausted."
"I'm Aidan Vickers," replied Aidan, "and this is my wife Kirsty, and daughter Joy."
"Please follow me," ordered the nun. "You can leave your cases. They can be fetched later." And she led them into a bright and airy side room, furnished with large, comfortable chairs. "Sit down and rest while I get you some refreshments," she commanded, and whisked out of the door again before either of them had time to say anything. Soon she was back with the tray, and setting it down on a low table, proceeded to serve them with fresh fruit juice and then small cups of strong, sweet black coffee. "This is cafezino," she said, as she gracefully handed them each a cup. "You will get a lot of this in Brazil. We Brazilians are very proud of our coffee." As soon as they'd finished their drinks, and after Sister Maria had cuddled Joy, she announced that she would take them to their house. "I will send a man with your cases," she chirped. "Follow me," and led them out of the front door and along a pathway which wound its way through the trees.
As they followed, Aidan whispered to Kirsty, "Do you remember I told you about Father James?"
"Yes," replied Kirsty, "but what made you think about him now?"
"Just this," replied Aidan. "Father James was insubstantial like water in a cupped hand, but this religious is as real as hot buttered toast." Kirsty laughed in spite of her tiredness, and felt her heart lift a little at the prospect of getting to know Sister Maria better, for she too had instinctively felt drawn to the small bird-like nun. Looking round her, Kirsty realised that the grounds of the convent were spacious and beautiful. There were many mature shade trees dotted about. Some had huge, feathery fern-like leaves, unlike anything she'd ever seen before. But she could also see smaller trees, a few of which appeared to be sprinkled with pink or yellow blossoms. One particularly caught her eye. It was set back from the path in an open space, and its sturdy branches were covered in brilliant scarlet flowers like fat red candles. A tiny, iridescent blue bird was hovering close to one of the blossoms, and it looked so beautiful that she lingered for a moment to watch it, all tiredness for the time being forgotten. Sister Maria and Aidan, who were a little way ahead with Joy, turned at her exclamation of pleasure and came back to see what she was looking at.
"We have many stately and beautiful trees in this garden," remarked the nun. "This one's a candelabrum tree. and is one of my favourites. And that's a hummingbird, she added as an afterthought. But come, I'm sure you want to rest and settle yourselves. There were several small, single-storied houses dotted among the trees, and Sister Maria stopped at one of them, took a key out of her habit and let them in. "This is our guest house," she said, turning to Aidan. "I'll leave you to settle in. Then please come back to the convent and we'll give you a meal. Don't forget to lock the door before you return," she added, and trotted quickly away.
Aidan looked after her retreating back and said admiringly, "There goes a remarkable woman, Kirsty. What do you think?"
"Yes, perhaps," replied Kirsty thoughtfully. Indeed, as the days went past and she got to know Sister Maria better, she found that their first impressions were correct. She never stopped being amazed, for example, at how somebody as thin and old as the little nun could be so energetic. It was as if all the food she ate went into fueling her love for people rather than nourishing her body. Kirsty also came to realise that one of the reasons the elderly sister was so vigorous was because her energy was always focused and never allowed to dissipate on useless talk and gestures. It reminded her of the power present in a steam engine, which is immense, but always rigidly channelled and under complete control.
They spent what was left of the day settling into their new home. Kirsty was amazed at the security bars on the windows and the fact that there was metal gauze in the frames instead of glass.
"I wonder if I shall ever get used to these bars," she wondered. "It feels a bit like being in prison." She was also surprised that there were no carpets on the floors, only tiles, and no curtains at the windows either. The furniture was large and looked as if it was made of mahogany, and the bed, when she sat down on it, appeared to be solid concrete. "Fine for backs, but do you think we shall ever be able to sleep on it?" she asked Aidan in consternation, trying vainly to bounce up and down on its unyielding surface. However, after they'd put Joy to rest in her cot under her mosquito net, they climbed gratefully into the bed, tucked themselves under their own net, and, despite the hard mattress, soon fell into an exhausted slumber. Apart from waking to feed Joy, they slept well, and were woken the next morning by a loud banging on the front door.
"Whatever's going on?" exclaimed Aidan as he made his way blearily to open it. There, on the doorstep, stood a portly, smiling woman of about 40, with a mop and a bucket, who shyly held out a letter to him. Without waiting for an invitation, she followed him into the house and began to wash the kitchen floor with remarkable gusto, slopping a great deal of water everywhere. Taken aback, Aidan returned to the bedroom and opened the letter. It was from Sister Maria, asking them to come to the convent for breakfast. Afterwards, Dr. Ramirez would personally call to fetch Aidan for a tour of the hospital, and she herself would escort Kirsty to the market to buy food. The woman with the bucket, the letter informed them, was Luan, and she was their cleaner, who would come every day to wash the floors. "I don't know about washing floors," remarked Aidan dryly to Kirsty, who hadn't yet seen what Luan was doing. "I think she's trying to turn the kitchen into a swimming pool. Let's hurry up and get through the bathroom in case she wants to scrub that too, and it floats away."
After breakfast, where Joy had been the centre of attention for the sisters, they found out Luan had finished the floors and had now turned her attention to the wide apron of concrete that surrounded the outside of the house.
Mystified, Aidan asked, "Why are you doing that?" Putting down her mop, Luan stood up and, smiling broadly at him, put a finger to her lips and shook her head to show that she didn't understand English. Aidan then pointed to the bucket and then to the concrete, holding out his hands and opening his eyes wide. Luan soon realised what he wanted to know and went to the edge of the path where the grass began, bent down and pointed to a group of large ants who were hurrying about among the grass stems. She then made a crawling motion with her fingers on the surface of the concrete going in the direction of the house, and they realised that the cleaning was to try to keep the ants from going inside. Kirsty shuddered. She was nervous of meeting both insects and snakes, and had already made the acquaintance of several oversized cockroaches, which she had surprised in the kitchen in the middle of the night when she had been feeding Joy. To her great relief, they had scampered away immediately she put the electric light on.
In fact, she thought, shivering, everything here seems to be extra big. The lorries are huge, the insects are enormous, and even the birds in the trees seem larger than those at home. "Oh, Aidan," she said, turning to him, "I hope I don't meet any really nasty bugs when you aren't here." Aidan smiled.
"And there was I, thinking you were going to kill them all for me," he said gently. At that moment, Dr. Ramirez appeared, coming along the path through the trees, and after polite introductions, Aidan was whisked away to inspect the hospital.
Thought Kirsty, looking after their retreating backs. "I'm not sure I envy you, Aidan, working with him. Too portly and pompous." Not long afterwards, bird-like Sister Maria arrived to find Kirsty sitting on one of the large easy chairs, rocking Joy, and watching entranced as a hummingbird hovered just outside the window, feeding on the nectar from a pink flowering shrub. The little nun perched herself on the edge of a nearby chair, hands resting serenely in her lap, and smiled. "Do you feel rested enough to come to the market with me?" she inquired. "I thought I could give you some idea of what food to buy and how our money works." "That would be lovely, sister," replied Kirsty enthusiastically. "But first, tell me, how is it you speak such perfect English?" Nodding her head up and down like a little bird, the sister replied, "Everyone says that, but really I can't take any credit for it. You see, my mother was English, so I grew up knowing both languages well." "That explains it," said Kirsty, smiling. "You had the best of both worlds then." And she busied herself putting Joy in the baby carrier and collecting the few things she would need for their outing. Soon all was ready, and with the baby on her chest and her small pack on her back, they left the house, locking the door behind them.
The day was hot, but because it was still very early in the morning, the heat was bearable. Sister Maria took the lead along a narrow path in the opposite direction from the convent. They had only been walking for about a minute when they came to a dense thicket of very large green plants topped with vivid scarlet leaves.
"They're poinsettias," gasped Kirsty in astonishment. "But they're gigantic. The one I had at home last Christmas was only about 30 centimetres high. Just look at them." Sister Maria smiled, saying, "But you see, these are where they belong, and that makes all the difference." Rounding the astonishing red clump, another surprise awaited Kirsty, for there, spread out in front of her, was a spectacular vista. She realised then that the convent had been built in a superb position, which commanded a breathtaking view over a wide river estuary just where it joined the sea. Both women stopped and marvelled at the panorama of river and sea, hills and distant forests, as little Joy, seeming to sense her mother's delight, gurgled and smiled up at them. "Yes, it's lovely, isn't it?" remarked Sister Maria, "but you're going to find it a stark contrast to what lies outside." And a look of intense sadness flitted briefly across her serene face. In that instant, Kirsty realised that Sister Maria was one of those rare souls who can retain their capacity for compassion, even after years of being exposed to the horrors of poverty and sickness. Most people she knew need to develop a hard shell to cope with the suffering they have to face each day, but not so Maria. Somehow she had performed that miracle of being able to cope with other people's anguish and pain while still retaining a soft heart of love.
The three of them continued on down the path and out of a side gate in the high wall. As they were turning out of the grounds, Kirsty noticed that Maria was carrying a cotton satchel across her shoulders, which seemed to be full of something knobbly.
"I wonder what she's got in her bag," she murmured to Joy, bending her head low, so that the sister didn't hear what she said.
Walking along the busy road, she was glad that the nun had put her on the inside of the pavement, as she felt intimidated by the roaring traffic and the throngs of hurrying pedestrians. Soon they reached the end of the high convent wall, where another road intersected theirs at right angles. Here the wall bent round to the left to enclose the top side of the convent hospital complex, and Kirsty, glancing in that direction, stopped, transfixed with horror.
"What's he doing here? Why isn't he in hospital?" she cried in anguish. Sister Maria came and stood beside her, a steadying hand on her arm. Together they both looked down at the man propped up against the wall. He had only one leg, and his head was done up in a filthy, blood-soaked bandage. Sitting in the dust beside him was a small child, who held out his cupped hands to the two women, repeating something in Portuguese over and over again. "He's a beggar, Kirsty," sighed Sister Maria sadly, and, so saying, opened her satchel, taking out 4 of the leftover bread rolls from breakfast, which Kirsty remembered the nuns had called painzinhos. She put these gently into the child's hands. Immediately the man snatched 2 and began to eat hungrily. The lad, however, looked up at them dully, mumbling something incomprehensible over and over again as he stuffed the bread into his mouth. "What did he say when you gave him the painzinhos?" questioned Kirsty, deeply shaken by the sight of such naked suffering. "God bless you, God bless you, God bless you," replied Maria sadly. Poor, desperate child. And taking Kirsty's arm, she led her across the busy road. "You'll see many beggars, I'm afraid, my dear," she remarked gravely, once they'd reached the safety of the opposite pavement. "Please don't give them money, but food, like I did. That's why I told you that there's much sadness outside the walls of the convent," she added. "If you visit the favelas, which are our shanty towns, you would see much worse sights than that, I'm afraid. But you must never go there on your own," she added firmly.
On reaching the market, Kirsty stopped and sighed with relief, glad to get away from the road with its huge, brightly painted lorries, flocks of buses, ubiquitous cars and noisy motorbikes. The busy shoppers seemed far less intimidating by comparison, and the heavily laden stalls, covered by brightly patterned awnings and holding a bewildering variety of exotic fruits and vegetables, fascinated her. Mounds of unripe bananas, green gold pineapples, brown hairy coconuts, oranges and knobbly custard fruits were stacked everywhere, along with strange, large, green, prickly objects that Sister Maria said were called jackfruits. There were some unfamiliar vegetables as well to choose from, and the little nun had a hard time trying to get her bewildered companion to decide what she should buy. Kirsty wandered from stall to stall, asking innumerable questions and touching some of the more outlandish fruit with amazement. At last her pack was full, and she thought how lovely it would be to get back to her shady house, as the sun was now getting really hot, and the noise of the market crowds was beginning to make her feel quite dizzy. However, just at that moment, Sister Maria said,
"Just wait here, my dear. I'll be back in a minute or 2, and darted off into the crowd. Kirsty stood under the shade of one of the awnings next to a heap of bright green limes. Suddenly she felt tired and drained. So much had happened in the last few hours. The journey, the convent, meeting Sister Maria and Juan, settling into the new house, coping with the heat and the horrid insects, and worrying about Joy's health. She felt as if life was rushing along with her far too fast. Everything was so new and alien, and she was aware that for the first time in her life she was in a place that felt hostile and intimidating. Not only was the language incomprehensible, which in itself was unsettling, but nor did she know what was dangerous in her environment and what was harmless. She felt both frightened and vulnerable, and wished that Sister Maria, her guide and protector, would come back. She was also aware that both she and Joy were very hot and sweating profusely. "This won't do," she said to herself. "Take some deep breaths and think of something calming." With that, she closed her eyes and tried to focus on a place in the past that would steady her. Her mind suddenly switched to the previous autumn, when she and Aidan had been visiting a National Trust property near their flat. It had been a golden October day. The leaves on the oak trees had begun to turn to russet, and the air had been warm and soothing. They'd sat down on a seat near a small mill stream, and Kirsty had closed her eyes just as she had them closed now. She concentrated hard, trying to conjure up the feel of the air in the quiet, beautiful garden. Yes, it had been warm, as the foreign air was warm, but there was a gentleness about it, and a deep undercurrent of delicious coolness, like the sharp notes in an otherwise heavy perfume. Gradually, the unfamiliar noise of the foreign market began to recede, and in her mind she could hear again the sound of the wind fondling the oak leaves in the trees overhead, and the quiet murmur of the stream at their feet. She imagined, too, that she could feel the comforting shape of Aidan's arm through his fleece. "Yes, that's where I belong," she sighed to herself. "Not here." However, the memory had anchored her, and when she opened her eyes again, it was to see Sister Maria making her way back through the throng of shoppers towards the fruit stall, with a now empty bag slung across her chest, and her white veil bobbing up and down among the crowd, like a little cork on a choppy sea.
The rest of the day passed in a haze of fresh experiences as Kirsty began to get to grips with her new environment. Innumerable small decisions had to be made, ranging from where it would be safe to store the market produce to how Joy's routine could be arranged in their new home. Later that evening, as she and Aidan were eating their first tasty meal of rice, beans and chicken, which she had somehow managed to cook in the unfamiliar kitchen, she related the details of her morning trip with Sister Maria. Aidan listened quietly. "Poor Kirsty," he said when she'd finished. "You've met the real Brazil much quicker than I did on my first visit. I didn't get to see it until my very last day."
"Shall I ever get used to it, do you think?" inquired Kirsty, who could still see in her mind's eye the grim sight of the beggar and the small child.
"I don't know," replied Aidan, shaking his head sadly. "In one way, I hope not. If you're right about Sister Maria, she never has, but somehow it hasn't destroyed her in the same way it nearly destroyed me. I wonder why. She seems so small and frail, but," he went on quizzically, spearing a chunk of fibrous yellow jackfruit, "to come to more mundane matters, do I really have to eat this chewy stuff? It tastes peculiar and smells like a dustbin." He looked so funny sitting at the table waving the fruit on his upturned fork that Kirsty found herself laughing.
"I'm so glad you don't like it, Aidan. I don't either, and you're right about the smell. Unfortunately, there's a great mound of it in the fridge. Perhaps Luan would like to take it home in the morning. I expect you have to eat it as a child to get used to it. You know, the flavour isn't that bad. It's the experience of eating it that's so awful. Give me a Cox's apple any day."
You have been listening to Tiz from the novel The Garden of Sparkling Delight.
You may find more information by searching the web for The Garden of Sparkling Delight.
Soaring to the skies with the wind in your hair, safe lay so deep in heart, trusting in those to keep you safe from harm. No hope tomorrow, nowhere to the